amendment.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. This amendment would add the Bipartisan Background Checks Act of 2023, authored by Republican Brian Fitzpatrick, to the underlying bill. This would provide universal background checks. We live in a state, live in a country where you can go into a gun store, you can be a felon, you can have a serious mental health issue that should disqualify you from obtaining a weapon, you can have a domestic violence restraining order against you, and you can seek to purchase a gun and you can be refused. But you can leave that gun store, you can go outside, you can buy that same weapon off the back of someone's truck. Or you can buy it online. Or you can buy it at a gun fair. It makes no sense to have a situation in this country where you can be refused because you failed a background check when you go to a store, but you can leave the store and buy the same weapon in the parking lot. That makes no sense to anyone, except perhaps the NRA. We don't have to live with the constant scourge of gun violence. We don't have to live every day just a phone call away from getting terrible news that someone in your family has been killed. Like so many families, my wife and I got a call from one of our kids about a shooting not far from campus. He was fine. Thank God he was fine, sheltering in place, but so many others have gotten much worse calls. And they're going to continue to get those calls if we don't do something about this. And the terrible shame about gun violence is it's not like we don't know what works. We know universal background checks work. We know an ban on assault weapons works. We know a ban on extended ammunition clips would work. We just have lacked the political will and courage to get it done. My constituents want universal background checks. This amendment would provide universal background checks. Your constituents, my friends across the aisle, they want the same thing. Americans overwhelmingly want truly universal background checks. Now, I realize the NRA doesn't want it, and so this puts all of us in the position of, are we going to vote for our constituents or are we going to vote for the NRA? Well, I'm voting for my constituents. I'm voting for people in my home state of California who are sick of the constant scourge of gun violence, who are fed up with a Congress unwilling or unable to do anything about it. It makes no sense to have a system where you walk into a store and you're refused a gun because you're a felon and you can go outside and you can buy the same gun off the back of someone's truck. That makes no sense. This amendment gives us a chance to change that. Gives us a chance to do something about this terrible, all-too-American problem of mass gun violence and everyday gun violence. Can we please do something? Protect the lives of our family and our neighbors, protect the lives of people in their churches and their synagogues. Can we please just do something basic, something simple, something universal, something that makes sense? I urge support of the amendment, and I yield back.
Gentleman yields back.
I withdraw the point of order.
Gentleman withdraws a point of order. Who seeks recognition? Gentlelady from Wyoming.
Move to strike the last word.
The gentlelady is recognized.
And I think that we've already covered the purpose of this bill and why it is needed, and the fact that we're talking about law-abiding citizens who both those in the military as well as those in non-traditional living arrangements. It's called the Travelers Gun Rights Act of 2024. We need to focus on what the purpose of the bill is. Anytime that a Democrat starts talking about universal background checks, you know that it's just another effort at gun grabbing and preventing people from being able to exercise their Second Amendment rights. I think that the bill is very clear. This is just another effort to prevent us again from being able to, a certain segment of our population, a certain segment of our law-abiding population from being able to exercise their rights. There are already laws in place for people who are straw purchasers or who are failing to follow the current gun laws. And instead of creating more laws, we should simply enforce the existing ones that are on the books and actually hold criminals accountable. With that, I urge rejection of this amendment and a yes vote on the underlying bill. Thank you. And I yield back.
The gentlelady yields back. For gentleman from New York. For New York, what purpose does he seek to be recognized?
Strike the last word.
The gentleman's recognized.
Mr. Speaker, I rise in support of this amendment. It is a terrible exception that you can buy a gun from anyone who's not a licensed dealer with no background check. Anybody can get the gun. Any bank robber, any serial murderer can walk in and ask for a gun, no questions asked. That makes no sense at all. From a private seller, that's what I said. From a private seller, not a licensed gun dealer. That makes no sense at all. This country has more gun deaths, I think 45 times as much per capita as any European country, because of loopholes like this, because of obeisance to the NRA. This is a modest amendment. All it does is say you have to have a background check, the same background check you'd have if you bought a gun from a licensed gun dealer, if you buy a gun from an unlicensed gun dealer. Why could anybody object to that? I urge adoption of the amendment, and I yield to Mr. Schiff.
I thank the gentleman for yielding, and I do want to respond to my Republican colleagues' comments. First of all, when you say any time a Democrat offers a universal background check amendment just because they want to take away people's guns, this is actually language written by a Republican from Pennsylvania. But even if it weren't written by a Republican, what about the rights of a middle school kid or an elementary school kid to go to school and not be gunned down with an assault weapon? What about their rights? What about the rights of worshipers in their place of faith not to be gunned down because someone could evade a background check by buying it at a gun show or buying it off the back of someone's truck? What about their right to life, to liberty, to the pursuit of happiness? Does that get no weight at all? And all we are asking is that people go through a background check before they acquire a record. Is that too much to ask for that child's life in grade school? Or that worshiper's life in church, or a moviegoer's life in the movie theater? Is it too much to ask that we make sure that people aren't circumventing the law by making background checks truly universal and not just a fractured system in which there are an infinite ways to avoid any kind of scrutiny? I don't think it's too much to ask, and I think we need to consider the rights of every American, including gun-owning Americans, not to be gunned down in their everyday lives because someone evaded a background check by buying the gun at a gun show or buying it online. It doesn't seem too much to ask to take this simple step if it's going to save so many American lives. I yield back.
And I yield back.
Gentleman yields back. Who else seeks recognition? Gentleman from Georgia, Mr. Johnson.
Thank you. I rise in full support of this very common sense amendment. I'll note, being from Georgia, that when I go home from the airport, I'll take the highway on home, and along the highway, the interstate, there will be billboards advertising for the next gun show coming to Georgia, coming to the metropolitan Atlanta area. And so I've had the opportunity to actually go to the gun shows, and I've been to the gun shows on the north side of town. I've been to the gun shows on the south side of town. And in every gun show, I see young urban residents purchasing guns from gun dealers, from licensed gun dealers, and also from unlicensed gun dealers. The tables will be set up in the gun show. There will be licensed gun dealers, and right next to the licensed gun dealer, an unlicensed gun dealer, and the setups are the same. I mean, you got tables, display cases. You can't really tell the difference, but the people there who come to make the purchases know the difference. And they will go to either a licensed gun dealer if they're legit, if they themselves are legitimate, and if they're not, then they make their way to the unlicensed gun dealer who's carrying the same wares as the licensed dealer, and they make their purchase from the unlicensed gun dealer. And then they walk out, and then they commit, those guns are used to commit crimes in urban and suburban areas that I represent. And those guns also make their way up here to Washington, D.C., and to other places with tighter restrictions on guns. And I don't know why we have a system of licensed gun dealers. I mean, there had to have been a reason why we originally licensed or we originally set up a regime whereby gun sellers had to be licensed. There was some usefulness in that setup, but the NRA came along and voila, a loophole inserted to allow unlicensed gun dealers. That undercuts the reason why you would have licensed gun dealers. The reason or the rationale for licensed gun dealers still exists today, and we need to go back to that system. We need to close this gun show loophole that allows for gun sellers to sell guns to anybody without a background check. It just simply leads to where we are today, which is too many firearms in the hands of too many people who should not have them. And with that, I will yield back.
Gentleman yields back. Who seeks recognition? The gentleman from New Jersey, Mr. Van Drew.
Just quickly on guns, you know, it's interesting to me that the areas where we have the most problems tend to be some of the areas that have the most strict and prohibitive legislation, laws, and rules dealing with them. I mean, I don't know what we don't understand, but we keep creating more laws, more rules, more regulations for those that are legal owners. Now, here's the deal. It's not the legal people that we have to worry about. We have two issues with guns. The first issue is that we have a real mental health crisis in this country. And I honestly believe, sincerely, part of that is due to the breakdown of the family, due to the stress and problems that exist in today's modern society, and just a lack of the basic values that we've held for so long. You know, when you look at these mass shootings and some of the horrific things that happen, almost all of those individuals put out in one way or another cries for help. They let people know. There were reports to the FBI, there were reports to others, and yet nothing happens so often. That's where we need to do better. And then the second issue is the rule of law. The rule of law. You know, when I was in the state Senate in New Jersey, and a nice person, and I'm obviously not going to say who it was, they were just passing another rule and another regulation and another law going after law-abiding, peaceful gun owners. And, you know, she was trying to convince me that this was a good thing to vote for. And I think we had a good, thorough discussion about it. But towards the end of it, she said, you don't understand, this person who did this, who was a criminal, was using a legal gun. She said the only difference was they scratched the numbers off the gun. It wasn't a legal gun. That's what we have to do. We need the rule of law. Those that would steal guns, those that would get them in an illegal way is where the concern should be. What's happening to our urban areas, the lack of respect for the law, the complete decay of so many of our cities and the increase in the crime rate, it's got nothing to do with the individual man or woman that goes target practicing, that goes hunting, that uses guns in a legal way. And it just gets old. So we keep passing more and more laws prohibiting more and more legal people that do no more harm, and yet we don't do enough. And in fact, we're doing less. You know, in so many of these areas, quite frankly, with liberal prosecutors, they let people out quicker than we ever did before. They commit a crime, they turn around, they're right out. I've talked to police officers in Washington, D.C., and they said it's to the point where it's told if it isn't a homicide and we don't hear gunshots, we don't even do anything anymore. But even when it is, they're turning people out more quickly. We all saw in D.C. when they wanted to actually let people out more quickly and reduce the penalties for carjacking. Do we realize in Washington, D.C., that we had an FBI agent whose car was jacked? We had staff people working for senators in Congress whose cars were carjacked at gunpoint, that we've had others, Congress, members of Congress, including a Democrat congressman, that were carjacked. It's all because we don't have the rule of law. We could fix this real easily. Better mental health and better rules and laws dealing with those who are illegal, those who are criminals. All those carjackers, they didn't go and get their gun registered. They didn't go through a process where they got qualified to carry a gun, as legal people do. So, what we'll probably do is make it harder for, good American people that aren't doing anything wrong to get a gun or to get ammunition. That's not the problem. I yield back.
Gentleman yields back. For what purpose does the gentlelady from Pennsylvania seek recognition?
I move to strike the last word.
Gentlelady is recognized.
Just in response to my colleague's comments, as someone who has been carjacked and was carjacked by people who were 17 and 19 years old and had obtained illegal guns because our streets, our entire country is awash in guns that people are making in their homes because we're not regulating ghost guns that are coming up the iron pipeline. There's a term for it that our law enforcement talks to us about. The iron pipeline from the southern states up the I-95 corridor and even smuggled on Amtrak to come up to cities like Philadelphia, to be trafficked to children who then use them in carjacking. So I do think we need to pass some laws. You say we've passed a lot of laws. In fact, they haven't become laws. We need more legislation that can be enforced to make sure that when people exercise Second Amendment freedoms, which I don't think anyone on this side is saying we got to take everyone's guns away, but we are saying that if you're going to own a gun, you need to do so responsibly. That's what my family grew up with in a rural area. I assume that Ms. Hageman's family had responsible gun ownership. They weren't just throwing them out on the street or selling them for a couple $100 to whoever happened by. I think we need to make some distinctions here. It is not a black or white issue.
Will the gentlelady
Like
yield
every
for a
other.
moment?
No, I'll yield back to the chair.
Gentlelady yields back. Gentleman from Wisconsin is recognized.
Move to strike last word.
Gentleman's recognized.
I would yield my time to the Congresswoman from Wyoming.
Thank you. Move to strike the last word.
Gentlelady is recognized.
All right, let's go back to what the purpose of this bill is, because we've moved way far astray. I'm going to say this again. H.R. 1508, the Travelers Gun Rights Act of 2024, is a simple and straightforward bill that allows active duty service members, their spouses, full-time RV travelers, and those without a permanent resident or address, such as what we've described in rural America, to legally purchase firearms with either a private mailbox or a post office box number. We are now addressing an entirely different set of legal and criminal issues that has nothing to do with the question of whether that subset of people should be able to use a private mailbox or a post office box number for their address to purchase a gun. And unless you can point to this particular subset of people being the perpetrators of the crimes that you have described, which I'm sure that the 17-year-old and 19-year-old involved in that crime that you have described were not living in RVs, were not the spouses of active duty service members, and were not themselves active duty service members, The same can be said for the people involved in the other types of criminal acts that you have described. Unless you can say that those are the ones that are the subject of this bill, then everything you have described is entirely irrelevant to the topic at hand. This is not about yet another effort at gun grabbing. This is about making sure that a particular subset of law-abiding citizens are able to exercise their Second Amendment rights. With that, I would yield to the gentleman from New Jersey.
Thank you, I appreciate it. And you're right. You're obviously right about what you just said. And unfortunately, it was addressed on the other side. And you know, a problem I have, I guess it's from being from New Jersey, I can't let stuff go sometimes, but this is a subject of the bill. It's a good bill, it's appropriate. And I guess my point would be, again, those people who are service members, those people who are living in rural areas or live in RVs or whatever the case may be, are not the problem here. And I believe that's what the gentlelady is pointing out. And in general, the gun issue is not the problem, is not those who legally obtain guns. There's no reason that these people can't obtain guns as well just because of their particular address. And I know in some rural areas, even in my part of New Jersey, there are folks that have P.O. boxes that are great individuals and great human beings and don't deserve to be discriminated against in this case. I yield back.
Gentlelady yields back, and the gentleman from Wisconsin yields back. Who seeks recognition? Chair recognizes himself for 5 minutes. I do think there's one place where this amendment is relevant to the underlying bill, and it is where the same people charged with enforcing this, which would be the federal government, are the same people who wrote it, and it's abundantly clear they don't understand rural America. The exceptions that are written allow for a federal government on interpretation of state law, whether it's farming law, whether it's domestic violence law, whether it's hunting, fishing, trapping laws. And it puts a tremendous burden shift on a citizen exercising their Second Amendment rights to qualify that they have the ability for a temporary transfer. First of all, there are no shooting galleries in North Dakota. I think you'd get beat up if you said the word shooting gallery in North Dakota. The vast majority of people who do these types of things in rural America do them in rural areas, on farms, on different places. But the audacity or the ability to temporarily do this with hunting, fishing, farming, ranching, and to be, in order to engage in your lawfully protected Second Amendment activity, you have to essentially vouch for compliance with every single state law that you may come into contact. Give you an example. North Dakota, you have bifurcated farmland. So if you're engaged in farming and you borrow your truck to your ranch hand that has a gun in the back, and you drive to town and have breakfast before you go check cows south of town, when you leave the ranch, you're probably engaged in farming. When you get to the place, you're probably engaged in farming. But when you stop at that town with that gun in the back of your car rack, as you borrowed the ranch owner's hand, you're not engaged in farming or ranching. You're having breakfast. And to say that the federal government has primacy in prosecution over that state law in all of these different situations that, by the way, happen every single day in rural America, every single day. But it's more draconian than that, and it's more nefarious than that, because the people I know are lawful gun owners. It doesn't matter if you're a hunting buddy or a hunting guide or a fishing guide or a farmer or a rancher. When you have the ability to the federal government to come in and prosecute based under intent by a transfer for temporary transfer, in utilizing state law to incorporate a federal charge, you are just going to see these things not happen because these people want to follow the law. They are law-abiding citizens. And so when I read these things and I read how the exemptions are written, and I appreciate my friend Mr. Fitzpatrick, and I appreciate people who care about this, but is it abundantly clear to me that the vast majority of the people who write these exceptions for rural America have never been anywhere farther than wherever their local city park is. And until we recognize that this is not how life occurs in places where I live and where Ms. Hageman lives and where Mr. Johnson lives, which is the same reason for the underlying bill, by the way, then you are dealing with issues that simply do not work in huge swaths of this country. And for that reason, I would oppose the amendment and I would support the underlying bill. And with that, I yield back. Occurs on the amendment from the gentleman from California. All those in favor say aye. Aye. All those opposed say nay. No. In the opinion of the chair, the noes have it.
Mr. Chairman, on that, I request to record a vote.
A roll call vote has been requested. Clerk will call the roll.
Mr. Jordan, Mr. Isa, Mr. Buck, Mr. Gates, Mr. Biggs, Mr. McClintock. Mr. McClintock votes no. Mr. Tiffany votes no. Mr. Massey, Mr. Roy, Mr. Bishop, Ms. Sparts, Mr. Fitzgerald, Mr. Bentz, Mr. Klein, Mr. Armstrong. Mr. Armstrong votes no. Mr. Gooden, Mr. Van Drew. Mr. Van Drew votes no. Mr. Nels, Mr. Moore. Mr. Moore votes